Welcome to another podcast from the Spinoza Triad. Myself, John Gibbs, Dr. Richard Miller and Dan Rowland. In this episode we discuss a famous thought experiment by Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, from the Gay Science. It's the idea of eternal reoccurrence. It has been a while since we recorded a podcast. Mainly this is due to Richard training fighters, playing his blues guitar, Dan burdened by the weight of teaching, and myself embedded deeply within the confines of a rich and fulfilling retirement. In that sense, our reflections today take us to the quality of our lives. Would we all be prepared to live this all again? Here is Nietzsche's thought experiment. What if, some day or night, a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness, and say to you, "This life as you now live it, and have lived it, you will have to live once more, and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it, but every pain, and every joy, and every thought and sigh, and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence, even this spider, and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment, and I myself, the eternal hourglass of existence, is turned upside down again and again, and you with it, speck of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, "You are a god, and never have I heard anything more divine"? If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life?
Well, it's Nietzsche, isn't it? He's giving it the full rhetorical.
So one little sentence: discuss. Yeah,
and discuss. Well, that's what I think. That's what we should do. I think we should discuss that because it is one of the more famous thought experiments of Nietzsche, and yet not one of the most famous thought experiments in the world. Yet, I think in this thought experiment, Nietzsche is referencing Descartes, and yet I think it projects onto us, or it provokes us into thoughts like the thought we had before we started recording. Which is, are there moments of regret where you say, "Well, I'll live, next time," or if I had to do that again, thank God that's disappeared into the oblivion of the past. What if days and moments and time were forever coming back to us?
It's just one thing, it's one object, one life, one object, just keep going up and down between past and future.
It's a kind of Groundhog Day, except you don't get to choose again. You aren't the sentient one in Groundhog Day. So in Groundhog Day, he wakes up every morning and
that's the difference. I was saying, do you know the whole process is going on, or is everything afresh every time in this thought experiment? If it's afresh any time, you're just in a position of ignorance, so it doesn't really make any difference.
You know what, Dan? I said this to my youngest daughter. I talked about it. That's the first thing she said. She said, do you know or not? I thought that's pretty good. Only 13. I thought that.
Yeah. And if you don't know, you have no idea. Maybe that is what's going on.
Sorry, John.
That changes a lot, doesn't it? If you now knew you lived, that everything you did was eternally reoccurring, that would alter the whole understanding.
Yeah, and is this thought experiment saying you know?
No, it's not saying either of those things.
It's not, it's leaving you to decide. Yeah. I think if you know, then that would be... Then the questions about determinism. You think, I'm making a decision now, but if this has happened a million times before, I'm the architecture of my life is all predetermined. I can do nothing, even though it seems like I'm at the center of my world and I'm, determining things like the American dream and et cetera, but maybe not. And you have to keep repeating it over and over again, endlessly feeling like you're the center of your own actions when you're not. So I don't know.
Well,
I think the question of knowledge is key. So if you knew it, you probably would try and do very little because it would happen anyway.
I think though he's, the sort of mechanics of the thought experiment, obviously changes things a lot. But I think what he's trying to get at there is really just a subtler point on how you find value and meaning in the life that you've got. Would it be one that would be worth living again? Could you find meaning in the choices that you've made and the way in which you live on a day-to-day basis? I think it's one of the most important. I don't want to say it's not a rock solid thought experiment. Like you said, there are holes actually in the experiment, but I think that reflections, it's got to be one of the most important in philosophy, isn't it?
I think all people should perhaps try and live like that. Realize that maybe, see your life as a canvas and it's a work of art, and you're trying to create something wonderful before you shuffle off this mortal coil, or not, or maybe not as grandiose as wonderful. I'm sounding pompous. I'm getting pompous there. Sorry.
Well, if you can find meaning in what you're doing, and it has, and I think it's a sort of antidote of capitalism as well. I think, John, we did talk about this briefly the other day, didn't we? But I think that the economy of economics, money, material wealth, these kinds of things are the way in which we value life in. But perhaps if you sort of apply this thought experiment, do you need to keep buying things in order to, in your last, if you had one day and it's repeated, would it be a continual acquisition of stuff? Or would it be a more kind of, would the day be filled with things that, and your life with things that you could draw meaning from, or values, probably as good a word, isn't it? Values from, that were meaningful, maybe.
And I suppose maybe this thought experiment is making you try and live like that every day, as if it is your last.
I don't know if it's like...
Is that going over the top again?
Yeah. I mean, that's not the way I engage. That
starts to sound a bit like those kind of, today is the first day of the rest of your life.
Pop psychology, yeah.
I think it's just, if you have a job, a career of some sort, does it have meaning beyond just earning money? And if you're earning really good money, maybe that does have value and meaning to you. Or, is your entire day spent working? Do you find value in walking? I mean, Nietzsche was really into country walks, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he lived on the side of a mountain, didn't he? So, I mean, it's a valuable thought experiment, and I think it's one that everyone should reflect on now and then.
Well, say you do. Yeah. Say you kind of know this is. I mean, again, it's not clear that you actually know. But so in retrospect, or so the demon says to you, look, you're going to live this again. And you say, well, I'll fling myself into an orgiastic experience of delight. I'll just stuff every cream cake. There's a moment in Groundhog Day where he's sitting there and he's got the whole table covered in cakes.
Yeah.
And he's just forcing as many cakes into his mouth, and he lights up the massive cigarette and he goes, what the hell, I can't die. This is it.
That sounds like most of my days.
Yeah. Are you still stirring? Was it Dan? Richard, you told me once you liked was it double cream with a honey? No, something stirred into it.
No, Nikki caught me once doing shots of double cream and a maple syrup in each one. Chaser.
Very indulgent. Yeah. Eating it secretly as well.
That one. Sweet tooth gone too far. Probably smoked too much of something I shouldn't have done.
Well, so the demon is. So the demon is. So if the demon has just left the room and you think, oh, that was a bit of a surprise. Okay. Yeah. In that case, do you light up the most massive thing and then fill up the double cream, or would you then think, well, actually, I think it's the point you're saying, Richard, is does any of that, if lived again and again and again, start to pall eventually? I mean, it must do, mustn't it? If it has no essential meaning, or can I live this forever?
Isn't that the problem, of hedonism And I guess the response is moderation, isn't it? Is it meaning is found in moderation, of being moderate in all things? Or
Aristotle's virtues. The doctrine of the mean.
I think in response to that, if you had to live it over and over again, perhaps you wouldn't smoke yourself into oblivion and then eat everything. You know, perhaps you could smoke a little bit and have a wee dram of double cream and maple syrup, maybe, and then go on a walk and see friends.
Yeah.
But essentially, you'd be thinking, well, if this is the eternal life, then I at least have to seek some meaning in it.
Yeah.
I would. So do you then go, well, none of that. I mean, not the double cream and the such like, but I will seek out purpose. And is that what Nietzsche is? So is Nietzsche imploring you to make the best of your life? Or would you say, well, it is purposeless. The world is purposeless. So all I've got to do...
It could take it that angle as well. It's just repeating over and over again.
So I'll simply reconcile myself to that innate meaningless repetition.
Well, I don't... I mean, isn't it a response to that, though? If the world is if there is kind of a nihilism at its core, how do you then deal with that? Well, I think that thought experiment saying, well, it might be like that, but how do you find meaning in what you do? Subjectively, you know, how do I then engage with a world that is largely void of meaning? How do I situate myself in that? And Nietzsche, there's always an undercurrent there, isn't it, of that not sort of overcoming yourself, becoming the best version of you. You know, when obstacles come into your life, how do you deal with them? Yeah. So I think that there's a temptation, isn't there, to sort of look at this stuff. You said that sort of self-help kind of thing, but I mean, and there are possible elements of that, but I think it's a far more subtle argument. You know, because you might, whether or not you see this thought experiment as knowing or not knowing, obviously changes the way you see it. But also, if you are mindful on a daily basis of the actions that you carry out, and
that's a good point,
the duties, the responsibilities that you have, and what they mean, I think it does again change the accent slightly on what you do. You know, you don't have to like a last day.
I think it's similar to Aristotle and Doctrine of the Mean, and trying to work on your life, not in a pop psychology way, like trying to make yourself endlessly positive, but just trying to make yourself morally better every day by choosing no extremes of action, just always someone going somewhere between the two. At the end of your life, you see what your life is. So you can't become, what's he say, a eudaimon until your death date. So you can't be that fully virtuous person until the day you die, when you look back over your life and say, well, that was it. That's what I did. And I tried every day to live through the doctrine of the mean, taking the middle point in any action, not to, what's the obvious one? Courageousness, bravery, foolhardiness. And so and that's 3 actions. You can be foolhardy, you can be a coward, or you can be courageous. So whereby you think about yourself, but you also think of others as well. So maybe that dovetails nicely with this thought.
It does, yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. I mean, I don't being overly prescriptive with those. He leaves these things kind of out there and invites the reader to think of them, not necessarily in a prescriptive kind of sense.
But it's certainly an invitation to think differently about the reality of moments.
Yeah.
It's certainly very different from, say, a medieval sense of this life is meaningless, therefore everything about it is a preparation to some meaningful life. It makes this life very meaningful.
Yeah.
It makes this discussion we're having, it makes everything you do. There shouldn't be a wasted moment. So it elevates each moment to greater significance.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite
that's a good thought. Yeah,
that's
good point.
A heavy burden to bear in a way.
I mustn't waste a moment, you know.
Indeed.
Am I? But then does it move you towards just being endlessly productive, which is moving then back to an economic kind of American dream model? You know, you've always got to be busy, you've always got to be achieving something, or is it the moment about just making sure you are maintaining your standards in every moment?
Again, I think it's subtle, isn't it? I mean, because it's so easy under contemporary culture that we live in, this idea of goals, achieving things, productivity, this idea of a constant trajectory of improvement, which is largely drawn from capitalism, isn't it?
Growth.
Like you said, John, you can mitigate to some extent this pressure by a meaningful existence, because it's going to be different to everyone, isn't it? You know, it's not putting an ethical framework around
I think it would. I think it would move towards an ethical system. When you start saying it's down to each and every individual, we've got a lot more in common than we have not as human beings. We have much more in common, and we have a lot. The human experience is kind of universal. We go from birth to death, and perhaps this statement from Nietzsche is trying to make us think about the universal nature of everything. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with you there, Dan, that it is a thought experiment which asks you to consider the nature of the human condition, the universality of everything that we share with all other human beings, the fleetingness of life, the potential for its lack of meaning. And that potential for its lack of meaning is a very modern concern. It's something Nietzsche would have been concerned with. That this world might be our only one go through this existence. So how do you respond to that? Do you respond with a rush, an urgency to make every second count? Well, of course, as you rightly say, Richard, capitalism exploits that. I mean, embedded within our culture is the fear of the fleeting moment of time, that you should seize upon this. Quick, 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 time is running out. Those before the tavern cried, open then the door, for we have but little time, and once gone may return no more. Life is fleeting. Open the tavern door. Let's get to it. Let's get on with enjoying, seizing, developing the momentary passage of existence. So it becomes a sort of meaningless cacophony of self-indulgence or distraction, unless we can find meaning. That's where I agree absolutely, Richard, unless you can find meaning.
If you want meaning, you've got to try and be moving towards some kind of virtue.
I think the strength of this thought experiment is that it isn't prescriptive in any sense at all. It's more of a kind of reflection.
I think it's not prescriptive, but you end up realising it's a call for you to up your game and not see life revolving entirely around yourself. I think that's my take on it. Or would you, otherwise you just go to pop psychology, capitalist view of the self, which is I just did whatever I wanted to do. I did it my way, and I'd do it all over again, Yeah. I'd trample on people, I'd get on top of things, I'd create my riches again, whatever. Endlessly being Midas through the centuries, if you were a successful rich person, shall we say.
But if that was your thing, and it gave you a life that you could live right or wrong or good, if it's meaningful to you, like if you live your life, I don't know, get a job in a bank, you're in high-end banking and you're making loads of money. You've got two people there, and one of them has never reflected on this stuff and just becomes very, very wealthy and spends lots of money and lives that way, but never reflects on it. I think it's what this thought experiment is getting the person to do is reflect on those conditions, and then if they're okay with that, if that's I gather huge meaning from closing the deal. From this form of success is something that is very meaningful to me, and I could see myself doing this for eternity. Yeah. So
you're saying it's a call just to reflect. Otherwise, if you live that kind of lifestyle of riches, you're just filling a gap. You're just filling up a hole.
Well, you could be. You could be, or you could not be.
But if you've reflected and you think, you reflect and you think, no, this actually suits me.
I think that's the strength of it. I think that's why it is so powerful. Yeah.
I mean, what you're saying there, Richard, is that the unexamined life is not worth living. And when Socrates makes that remark, he is both imploring us to be reflective and to examine ourselves, and the nobility of understanding, the nobility of self-reflection, the essential morality of the reflective human being. But it's also, I think, when you reflect upon yourself, you are supposed to arrive, hopefully you arrive at some better understanding. That better understanding may be the limits of your understanding that you don't understand, but it surely is a quest greater than simply a self-affirmation of this is what I do, this is my way, which is ultimately just relativism.
But it asks you to think these things, and it asks you to think about the significance of the moment. I was thinking that I listened to the radio the other day, and it said that there's an increasing number of secular funerals in this country. So more and more people basically get cremated with their friends doing something like a few weeks later taking their ashes down, throwing them off Brighton Pier or something. or taking them to the Liverpool football ground. But then they said, well, what are the most popular songs played at people's funerals these days in this more secular world? And apparently it used to be My Way, Frank Sinatra.
Right.
And then now it's being supplanted. My Way is still really popular, but it's
I'm forever blowing bubbles. Or...
No, that's West Ham, Dan. That's West Ham.
Sorry, I'm not with the football. Sorry.
Everyone knows that's West Ham.
It's a popular funeral song. Forever blowing bubbles.
You'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone.
You'll never walk alone. Thank you, John.
You'll never walk alone. Yeah. Well, in a sense, that's in a secular world. If you think of the message after a lifetime. And there you are, you're going to be cremated, and your relatives or you have written some bit of paper. When I snuff it, I did it my way.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Does that mean, the message to the world is, I may have been a selfish bastard, but that was the way I did things.
Well, that feeds into Richard's point that shows if you have that as your send-off, that you have actually reflected on your life and you do it all over again. So it's kind of affirming what Richard said. So if you have that as your funeral song, that you're quite happy with the way everything went.
That's just an
because you thought about it. Because you thought about it and you dealt with it. And I can see what Richard's saying. That's a good point.
But isn't that just a kind of relativism? Sod it, I did it my way.
Well, you either take it as I said, there might be some common human themes coming out of this. That everyone says, oh yes, I should think about X, Y, or Z, or is it just a call to be reflectively selfish?
Well, I think the point is that if you don't reflect and think, it's almost like the thinking now is done for you, and never because of technology. It's almost like canned laughter. Where your TV laughter is coming, but it's almost like. With social media, the internet, with algorithms, it shows you everything you want to see all the time anyway. It's almost like your waking consciousness is mediated from you by technology. This is, in part, anyway, a way of engaging with that.
Well, isn't that a bit...
Good point, yeah, I agree with that.
What you're saying there, Richard, that's fascinating, really. I think that the idea that, in a sense, we've created a bit of a demon. The demon...
Yeah, 100%,
phone.
That's interesting,
I can now live moments again and again and again and again. I mean, I've got a phone full of photographs I never look at, but if I cared to, I can actually... And even now Facebook will throw something back at you saying, this was what you did 5 years ago. Jesus Christ.
And soon it will be on the virtual... It'll be in the virtual goggles.
But the thinking's done for you, isn't it? I think that's the key point. You don't have to think. Everything's almost done for you.
Those endless photographs of you grinning manically in front of various tourist attractions.
Monuments, yeah.
Or at a party with mates, you no longer remember their names, but you're clearly having the most ecstatic time. And you think, well, what was the meaning of all that? I mean, clearly I was having a great time at the time. But who's that standing behind me? And I look a bit confused. And actually I remember later I really needed to use the loo and couldn't find one. But that moment in time is not the whole moment. And do I want to live that again? So it does make you ask.
Yeah.
It elevates the moment. I was thinking of the film, the film Citizen Kane. But in Citizen Kane, the Kane at the beginning it says the word rose. His last word. Sorry, I'm going to spoil the film for anyone now. But on his deathbed, he says the words rosebud. And they can't, so he says, right, the richest man in the world, Hearst, who's got more money than God, he says rosebud. So they try and find out what rosebud means. You never find out. And they track back through his life. And it turns out the rosebud was his childhood sleigh, the thing he used in the snow. So his last his last thought on Earth, with all the wealth that he had in life, and power, the last thought is my childhood. An afternoon in the snow.
Interesting.
Well,
that perfect moment. Perhaps he had a perfect moment from him. The rest was distraction.
So the perfect moment would be what? The innocence of youth, the innocence of childhood, the living. I don't want to say living in the moment because that's such a.
Well, it's living unconsciously.
I think that's it, Dan.
I think, and then you're totally yourself. You're not having to worry about putting an act on or worrying about even acting to yourself. You're just completely oblivious to actually living the moment. You're oblivious to the moment. Does that make sense? I don't know. You don't try and capture it. It's just, you just live it.
So if you did know that this was the life,
that would
again
yeah.
terrible.
I mean, here's a horrible thought. Imagine, let's say, this year, someone said you are going to have the most perfect moment on the 22nd of June, 2023. You'd have all this build up to it. And then you get nervous, and then it happens. This is the most perfect moment. You think, well, is that it? maybe because you've been building up to it and thinking about it and worrying about it, that adulterates the actual experience itself, which then spoils it. So perhaps it's a call to be happy with your choices and to relax.
Probably certainly a call to spend an awful lot less on your wedding.
Yeah.
20,000, 30,000, 40,000 is not unknown.
Which you just do for other people to think you're very wealthy, which seems rather meaningless.
And then you can't quite remember it because you've
why do people spend so much time trying to impress people with wealth that they don't have? That seems exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the anydayness of it is a kind of snapshot of your life. And I think that this idea of a day or a good day or a bad day is just what meaning does it draw for you for that day? And how conscious are you of those things that you do on a daily basis? Those meanings, the root of philosophy, isn't it? If we could say there was a philosophical way to live your life, it's things like this are at the heart of them. And really important as well, because philosophy can disappear up its own backside quite easily and be meaningless. Yeah, meaningless, and there's a specific way of a language that's used. There's a specific way of writing about issues, and different philosophers or lineage of philosophers. You're expected to write in a certain way and talk in a certain way, and it's largely just a complete waste of time.
Totally, yeah.
I think philosophy, rather than be an academic subject, should be something that's lived, and I think questions like this force you to live it rather than just talk about it or write it down. And again, Dan, and John, I think when we've talked about the Greeks, I've found similar kind of value in those kinds of thinkers, which again can also end up disappearing down that road as well.
Doesn't Plato come up as another practical philosophical use when he comes up with the ring of Gyges, which might feed into this, whereby if you had a ring which made you invisible, would you continue to behave in the way that you behave? And obviously if you do continue to behave in the way you behave in a normal everyday sense because you're invisible, that would make you more virtuous than not.
Well, it'd be a lot easier to smoke loads of cannabis and do shots of double cream and
perhaps be cheeky to other people if you're in a bar and you're invisible.
Yeah,
you put the ring of Gyges on.
So, so when Nicky's looking, where's Richard? Yeah. I need him to mow the grass.
Yeah.
I thought he was in that room. All I can hear is a slurping sound in there.
Yeah. More you go is,
or a hammock swaying in the garden. Yeah. I'm not here.
And it could go worse. You could do terribly immoral things as well. You could go and steal things if you had this cloak of invisibility.
The ring of Gyges does, if that thought experiment's asking you about power and the ethical use of power, and what you would do if you had the power of life and death over others and so on. I mean, if we looked at our contemporary world and said, what's Putin doing? He's 70 years old, and he's played a card or a set of cards that bring his country near to destruction for no reason. He could have left it happily. He could have pottered down the tennis courts and ridden his horses around without his shirt on.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
And he could have spent his money in luxury hotels. All those around him, those clustering, greedy oligarchs.
Yeah.
Could have been pottering off to the south of France in their luxury yachts.
And he gives him all this stress at the end of his life.
He's done something absurd.
Just relax, Vladimir. Relax.
Relax. But he's done it for eternity, isn't he? He's done it to...
I think he can't imagine...
He feels the breath of mortality on his throat, on his neck.
And he can't imagine a Russia without him, or a world without him. He's got that level of ego and self-certainty that he can't imagine the world continuing without him. That's maybe I don't know, I may be wrong, but it seems bizarre. You're right, at the end of his life, he does this.
Yeah.
We're going to have the KGB after us now. You know that.
I've always thought Putin had a point, you know.
Now you're going to have the world against us.
If
can't win.
This moment again.
I think we all need a ring of Gyges at this point.
But yeah, that idea of what your legacy might be, or what will live on after you, or what...
But I think that's the point of this thought experiment. What do you want to leave behind? Do you want to leave a polished stone or a roughly hewn piece of metal? You know, do you want to...
I don't see it as legacy. I think if...
you don't see it as legacy, you see it as moment.
No, I just think it's just saying, how do you live your days? You know, what did it have meaning? In regards to Putin, if that's what he views as a meaning, it's meaningful to him. It's really just that. Because if you try to add any more to it, then you end up in a series of ethical problems. What's that book? Alan Badiou's book, Ethics, An Understanding of Evil, is called. It's a great little book, but I think his premise is how evil, however you want to define it, arises out of ethics. So out of a drive towards ethics. This thought experiment is that there is an ethics of the self there as a sort of self-prescriptive kind of nature, I suppose. It calls into question for you to think about your actions.
If the demon does appear to Vladimir Putin, and wakes him at 3 a.m. and says, "This is the way it's going to be. You're going to have to live the last year again and again and again. It's mistake after blunder after stupidity after then you're going to go through all these again. All you can hope. What if Putin is thinking anything at all about anything? He's hoping it'll all work out in the long run, and that this series of catastrophes that he's brought on his country and himself will somehow blur into a bit like let's have Liz Truss. Liz Truss lived the last week
saying three sentences over and over again.
It's a curse. It would be a curse.
Yeah.
It would be a demonic curse.
Perhaps she sees it as being meaningful to her. Perhaps she has an optimistic view that her doing whatever she's doing will, it's just changing the accent on reflecting.
I think, Richard, I think because Nietzsche's using the word demon and then saying repetition and then getting you to think, I think it's a call for you to perhaps live differently rather than reflect and accept what you're doing. I think as soon as people start reflecting seriously, then there will be a change in the way you live your life. I think it is a call to make changes to the way you live your life. So
it doesn't tell you about the changes, does it? That's the point.
Whether this is a nightmare or not.
I think the demon is like the 3 wishes. It's the leprechaun on the. It's an idea of someone being able to conjure it out. What would you do if you had 3 wishes, and so on? The other thing.
So I think we're split on this, which is interesting. Ethical position. I'm saying it may be. I think, John, you're in the middle somewhere.
Actually, I think you're right there, Dan. I'll accept your characterisation there, because I think I am trying to square the circle between a relativist view of Nietzsche, which I think Nietzsche is often accused of being relativist because he wants to move beyond good and evil. I mean, that's one of the most famous observations, to go beyond good and evil, the morality of Christianity, the morality of the slave, and so on, and Judeo-Christian morality, which he does not like at all. Well, and it's interesting earlier, Richard, that you mentioned Alain Badiou's book on the morality of evil, or at least evil having its origins in a formation of morality. Well, we've come across this idea before. In Christianity, I mean, Christianity is the Christianity of turn the other cheek, the golden rule of do unto others as you would be done by, but it's also the religion of the Inquisition and of the torture chamber and of burning heretics at the stake and of hell being created as an ethical form of defining good, which itself, by those that created the idea of hell, those who define hell, is evil. Hell is clearly evil, but it has to be incorporated within the structure, the framework of Christian morality. When Thomas Aquinas says the joys of heaven will be more sublime because the saved can look over the ramparts of heaven and see the torments of the poor souls in hell, he's revealing the innate cruelty and evil within the ethical structure of Christianity. And in that sense, within our own liberal democracy, our good democracy, and Putin's authoritarian brutality, which clearly is authoritarian brutality, but it helps us to define ourselves as good. Yeah, there's much in our society desperately unequal, destruction of the environment, appalling history of exploitation and imperialism, and yet those things are often justified through forms of morality, forms of ethics. I remember once thinking, I don't know if I thought this or was told this or suggested this, that democracies are slow to go to war, but they fight them very cruelly and with greater mercilessness because they're fighting for good, for ethics. You only have to look at the Vietnam War to see examples of that. The pulverizing of Vietnamese cities and the use of napalm was in the name of good. So ethics contains within it the definition of itself as good because it has a very precise construction of evil as well. And in that sense, Nietzsche is asking people asking us to transcend good and evil. He's also asking us famously, God is dead, how do you live in a world without God? And how do human beings transcend Judeo-Christian morality, the restricting morality of the slave? How do you transcend the bourgeois morality that is both hypocritical and deeply ingrained with cruelty? How do you do that? Well, you do it by transcendence. In that sense, I think, Rich, you're right. He asks human beings to be their own gods, in that sense. To find the morality in the universe. Very difficult thing to do. To impose it, to invent it, to become God. It's a very lonely position to be in.
I think there's another aspect to this as well. I think it's asking you and me to consider what living is.
Interesting.
How many days do we go by we can't remember because they just proceeded through? Or,
just going shopping, cleaning, hoovering.
Can't remember what you ate for dinner yesterday. And there must be different. So at the moment, I'm quite intensely thinking about this sort of stuff, I guess. I think I am. And yet, lots of other times, I can't remember where I've put the car keys, and I'm wandering down the street. They're thinking about drifting into the past. Lots of momentary existence exists in a spectrum of consciousness that drifts in and out of where I am at this moment. So a lot of my life I've dreamed away in a way.
I know, it's terrifying. If you say, what was I doing 3 weeks ago, this time 3 weeks ago? It's not instant, is it? Well, with me anyway. Some people might be. Yeah. What was I doing this day 6 months ago?
Yeah.
So you got this dream. So it's strange. What's behind you is very dreamlike. Is that what you're saying? The past becomes dreamlike.
Or it's asking you about what it is to be alive. At least I don't know whether Nietzsche was going down that road. I didn't care, really. I think for me, that thought experiment does ask me also about the endless repetition of existence is, well, I spend a third of it asleep. I spend a lot of it parochial and quotidian everyday stuff. I dream my way through lots of things, hoping to pay off the mortgage here and hoping that I'll get there next year. And don't worry, it's nearly only 3 weeks to the holidays, and so on. And lots of my life is lived in a sort of imaginary future that I'll eventually get to. And whether I do or not before I snuff it, it's hard to say. And I think it does ask you that as well about
definitely, John. Yeah,
the quality of your life. And it's not uncomfortable. I think it would be. You might well turn to the demon and tell him to get lost. It's a horrifying thought. Who cares? I don't want to know that I'm going to live this again and again and again. I don't continue to have some sense of regret that I never wrote the great novel when I was 25 years old. Or the sort of feeling that I didn't live up to this remarkable existence. I mean, either if we do live life again and again and again, that could be a curse. But it could also be the other thought experiment is the demon comes to you and goes, well, it's the most remarkable kind of chance that ever brought you here, and this is your one shot. Because there's nothing after this, and there was nothing before this. And your brief awareness of yourself is all there is. That's equally quite
brilliant. Yeah, I think that's a good concluding point.
Yeah.
I think we've done it, guys. I think that really
I don't know.
says it all, John, really. I think,
Well, I think you could talk about this a lot, couldn't you?
Yeah.
You could spend your whole life talking about this.
I think you could.
Yeah.
And then you'd say, oh my God, I spent my whole life talking about that. Talking.
I didn't do anything. Yeah.
I was talking. I should have been invading Ukraine.
Yeah, cool.
I think that's a very Nietzschean thought, isn't it? The man of action, actually it's not. It's a Greek thought, isn't it? What is the best life to live? The life of reflection or the life of action? To be or not to be.
That's another podcast, I think. Life of action or life of reflection.
I'll go for the life of reflection in the garden with the cheese.
Yeah.
I think from all these podcasts, I think that does seem the most delightful proposition. Yeah.
You have been listening to the Spinoza Triad with Dr. Richard Miller, Dan Rowland, and myself, John Gibbs. If you enjoyed our discussion, share us on social media, join the Facebook group, or link to our website. Until next time, thanks for listening. Footnotes. In today's episode, Dan mentioned the golden mean, or the doctrine of the mean. This comes from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, a book, or at least the lecture notes of a book, or lectures he gave, to instruct his son, Nicomachus, on being a virtuous person. For Aristotle, being good meant being virtuous, and virtue operated between two extremes of vices, excess and deficiency. For instance, a courageous person, in excess, was reckless. In deficiency, they were cowardly. An honest person, in excess, was blunt and rude. In deficiency, was a liar. And so on. The doctrine of the golden mean, to live ethically, had a huge influence on Thomas Aquinas' Christianity. And indeed, British public school education. Richard mentioned the French philosopher, Alain Badiou, and his essay, Ethics on an Understanding of Evil. Badiou is a Marxist and sees evil as a manifestation of dominant ideologies such as capitalism and bourgeois economics and culture. Our discussion this week was mainly concerned with one thought experiment from Nietzsche's The Gay Science. and it's the concept of eternal reoccurrence.